You're riding in a column of armoured knights. The morning sun glints off thousands of lance tips ahead of you. Your horse's breath steams in the November cold. The lake lies calm to your left, dark and deep. Mountains rise to your right, their slopes covered in frost and shadow. You're heading to crush a peasant rebellion. This should take a few days at most. You've done this before. Farmers don't fight knights. They run, they beg, they die quickly. Then you hear it, war horns, dozens of them, echoing off the mountains in a sound that makes your horse's ears flatten. You look up. The hillside is moving. No, those are men. Hundreds of men charging downhill towards you, their boots gripping ice that would send you sprawling. You reach for your lance, but there's no room to lower it. The knight in front of you is pressed against the one ahead of him. You're trapped in a 3-man wide column between a mountain and a lake. Something massive crashes through the trees above. A log the size of a wagon wheel tumbles down the slope, bouncing, spinning, accelerating. It hits the column 20 yards ahead with a sound like breaking bone. Horses scream. Knights in 60 pounds of plate armor are launched into the freezing water. More logs follow. Boulders. An avalanche of wood and stone hammering your formation into a mass of tangled metal and dying horses. Then the peasants reach you. A halberd, 8 feet of wooden shaft topped with an axe blade, a spear point and a hook, punches through the gap in your armor where your breastplate meets your arm. You don't even see the man who kills you. He's already moving to the next target. Within 3 hours, the finest military force assembled by the House of Habsburg lies shattered in a narrow mountain pass. Thousands of bodies clog the road and float in Lake Egerie. The few who escape carry news that will shock medieval Europe. Peasants, fighting on ground of their choosing, have annihilated an army of knights. The myth of mounted nobility's invincibility dies here, drowning in blood and icy water. And a new nation is born in the screams. Before we dive into this forgotten slaughter that changed the course of European history, if you enjoy learning about the battles that textbooks skip over, the ones where everything we thought we knew about warfare gets rewritten in blood, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this, and please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about how a few thousand mountain farmers with farming tools changed the destiny of nations. Here's what you need to understand about November 15th, 1315. This isn't just another medieval battle. This is the moment when the entire social order of feudal Europe, the idea that armoured nobility are militarily superior to common people, gets thrown off a cliff, literally. The Battle of Morgarten is one of the most lopsided military catastrophes in history, and almost nobody knows about it. We learn about Agincourt, where English longbowmen devastated French knights in 1415. We learn about Crécy 30 years before that. But Morgarten? Morgarten happens a century earlier, and the casualty ratio is even more extreme. Roughly 9,000 Austrian soldiers, including 2,000 fully armoured knights, march into a mountain pass to discipline some rebellious peasants. 1,500 Swiss mountaineers are waiting in ambush. When it's over, estimates suggest 4,000 to 5,000 Austrians are dead. Swiss casualties are described by contemporary chroniclers as light, meaning probably dozens, not hundreds. Think about that for a second. This isn't a close battle. This isn't a tactical victory. This is a slaughter so complete, so one-sided, that the losers don't even have time to fight back. And it happens because a handful of Swiss magistrates understand something that Europe's military aristocracy refuses to accept. Terrain matters more than armor. Psychology matters more than breeding. Surprise matters more than courage. And a farmer with an 8-foot pole weapon, fighting on frozen ground he's walked his entire life, is deadlier than a knight on a warhorse who can't even stay on his feet. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. This battle isn't the end of something. It's the beginning. Morgarten is the birth announcement of Switzerland. Less than a month after the battle, representatives from 3 small mountain cantons meet to sign a pact that uses, for the first time, the word Eidgenossenschaft, confederacy. That document is Switzerland's birth certificate, and over the next 200 years, the military reputation earned in this pass will make Swiss soldiers the most feared infantry in Europe. Kings and popes will pay fortunes for Swiss mercenaries. The Swiss Guard still protects the Vatican today because of what happens on this cold November morning in 1315. So, how did we get here? How does a collection of mountain farmers end up annihilating one of the most powerful military forces in the Holy Roman Empire? To understand that, you need to understand who these people are and what they're fighting for. And you need to understand the family that wants to crush them. The House of Habsburg. In 1273, a relatively minor noble family from Swabia, the Habsburgs, catches lightning in a bottle. Rudolf of Habsburg becomes Holy Roman Emperor. Suddenly this family goes from managing a modest collection of castles to controlling vast territories across Central Europe. They do it the Habsburg way: strategic marriages, careful purchases, and when necessary, outright conquest. Their ambition is limitless. They want to consolidate every scrap of territory between their Austrian heartland and their holdings in Swabia and Alsace. They want to control the trade routes. They want to own the mountain passes where goods flow between Germany and Italy. And standing directly in their path are three small territories that refuse to submit: Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden. These are the forest cantons. Uri controls the northern approaches to the St. Gothard Pass, one of the most important trade routes through the Alps. Schwyz and Unterwalden occupy strategic valleys. All three hold a special status called imperial immediacy, meaning they answer directly to the emperor, not to local nobility. They govern themselves. They collect their own taxes. They maintain their own militias. And they absolutely refuse to become Habsburg subjects. In 1291, representatives from these three cantons meet and sign the Federal Charter, a mutual defense pact. If one is attacked, all three will fight together. This is revolutionary. These aren't noble houses forming a dynastic alliance. These are communities of farmers and herders forming a democratic union to resist feudal absorption. The Habsburgs see this as an intolerable obstacle. For 24 years, tensions simmer. The forest cantons fortify their positions. The Habsburgs try diplomatic pressure, economic coercion, legal maneuvering. Nothing works. These mountain people won't bend. And then, in January 1314, everything breaks. The Benedictine abbey at Einsiedeln, wealthy and politically connected, claims expanding grazing rights over lands traditionally used by Schwyz farmers. This isn't a minor dispute. For subsistence farmers, grazing land is survival. The abbey, protected by Habsburg patronage, pushes harder. The Schwyz response is explosive. On January 6, 1314, Werner Stauffacher, the Landerman or magistrate of Schwyz, leads 300 armed men in a raid on Einsiedeln Abbey. They're not there to negotiate. They smash through the doors, plunder the storerooms, desecrate altars, and take monks prisoner. This is a violation of every feudal and religious norm. You don't attack a monastery. You don't lay hands on clergy. The raid is designed to send a message: Schwyz will not submit. The message is received. The Bishop of Constance excommunicates the raiders. Frederick the Handsome, the Habsburg claimant to the imperial throne, demands punishment. But political chaos in the Holy Roman Empire. There are two rival emperors, Frederick and Ludwig of Bavaria, both claiming legitimacy, delays Austrian response. For nearly 2 years, the forest cantons wait, fortifying their positions, training their militias, knowing retaliation is coming. And in October 1315, it arrives. Duke Leopold I of Austria, younger brother of Frederick the Handsome, assembles the punishment force at Baden. Leopold is 25 years old, vigorous, ambitious, and eager to prove himself. He's called the Glorious and the Sword of the Habsburgs. This is his moment to crush rural rebellion and secure Habsburg control of central Switzerland once and for all. He gathers an enormous host, 2,000 heavy cavalry, fully armoured knights from Austria and Swabia, the military elite of feudal society, and 6,000 infantry levied from cities like Zurich, Lucerne, and Zug. This is overwhelming force. 8,000 soldiers to discipline 3 mountain cantons that can field at most 2,000 men combined. Leopold announces his intention to crush the unruly rustics under his feet. Here's what Leopold doesn't understand. The Swiss aren't planning to meet him in open battle. They're not going to line up on a field and fight by the rules of chivalric warfare. They're planning something far more brutal. Werner Stauffacher and the other Swiss commanders know they cannot win a conventional engagement. Their militiamen, well trained by mountain standards, disciplined, tough, are still farmers and herders. They don't have armour. They can't match Austrian cavalry on open ground. But they have 2 enormous advantages. First, they know every foot of this terrain. They've hunted these mountains, herded cattle through these passes, walked these trails in snow and ice their entire lives. Second, they understand that terrain can be a weapon. You don't just fight on ground, you fight with it. The Swiss construct elaborate defensive works, called Letzi, at the obvious invasion routes, Arth and Rothenthurm. These are earth and log barriers designed to channel attackers into kill zones. Austrian scouts report these fortifications back to Leopold. But there's one approach that appears conspicuously undefended. The road along Lake Egerry through Morgarten Pass. A single watchtower stands guard. Otherwise, the route seems open. To Leopold and his commanders, this looks like Swiss desperation. They don't have enough men to defend all approaches, so they've left one vulnerable. It's an invitation. Leopold takes it. This is Werner Stauffacher's masterpiece. The open door is bait. And for days, while Leopold's army assembles and prepares, Swiss woodsmen and farmers work on the slopes above Morgarten. They identify large logs and boulders on the steep hillside. They position them carefully. held in place by wooden chocks that can be knocked away quickly. They clear lanes through the forest so these projectiles will tumble downhill without obstruction. They identify concealment positions for crossbowmen along the road. They select rallying points on the upper slopes where 1,500 men can hide, wait, and charge downhill when the signal comes. These aren't professional soldiers. These are men who know this mountain the way you know your own home, and they're preparing to turn it into an abattoir. November 15th, 1315. Dawn breaks cold and clear. Duke Leopold's column departs Zug, heading south toward Schwyz. The mood is confident, almost festive. Knights ride in gleaming plate armor, their heraldic banners snapping in the morning breeze. This is what they were born for. This is what they trained for. They're professional warriors heading to crush an amateur rebellion. The infantry follows, levy troops from subject cities, less enthusiastic but obedient. Supply wagons creak along at the rear. The column stretches for miles. It's an impressive sight. The military might of the Habsburg dynasty on display. The road follows the eastern shore of Lake Ageri. To the left, the lake lies dark and cold, deep enough to drown a man in full armor in seconds. To the right, the steep slopes of Morgarten mountain rise covered in forest and frost. As the column advances, the road narrows. Knights who were riding 4 or 5 abreast are forced into 3, then 2. The infantry bunches up behind them. The supply wagons slow, creating gaps in the line. This is exactly what the Swiss are waiting for. A compressed, confined column with no room to maneuver. Target that cannot dodge or spread out or charge. Swiss scouts track the Austrian advance from the moment it leaves Zug. Runners carry reports to Werner Stauffacher and the other commanders hidden on the slopes. When the head of Leopold's column reaches the hamlet of Morgarten, still technically in Zug territory, the trap is ready. 1,500 Swiss militiamen crouch in concealment on the mountainside. Most wear only leather jerkins or woolen tunics marked with white crosses, the symbol that will become Switzerland's flag. Some wear the black bull insignia of Uri. They carry halberds, those devastating 8-foot pole weapons that combine an axe blade, a spear point, and a hook designed to pull riders from horses. Others carry military flails, long swords, clubs, and axes. These aren't ceremonial weapons. These are tools designed for maximum damage against armoured opponents. And the Swiss have one more advantage that Leopold's knights don't even know about. Crampons. Iron spikes strapped to their leather boots that let them charge downhill on icy frozen ground where armoured men will slip and fall helplessly. The Austrian vanguard approaches a small barricade across the road, logs stacked chest high. It's a minor obstacle. The lead knights slow, preparing to dismantle it or ride around. Behind them, the column compresses. Horses nose to tail, men press together. And Werner Stauffacher gives the signal. War horns, Harstorner, bellow across the valley. The sound is enormous, echoing off the mountains, a primal roar that sends horses' ears flat against their skulls. 50 Swiss crossbowmen rise from behind the barricade and loose at point-blank range. Bolts punch through armor with mechanical precision. Knights topple, horses rear and scream. The front of the column dissolves into chaos. Before the Austrians can even process what's happening, the hillside erupts. Swiss woodsmen knock away the chocks holding massive logs in place. Centuries-old trees, stripped of branches, weighing hundreds of pounds each, tumble down the steep slope. They're not rolling slowly. They're accelerating, bouncing, spinning, crashing through the forest with a sound like continuous thunder. And they hit the Austrian column with devastating effect. A log the size of a wagon wheel strikes 3 knights simultaneously. The impact launches them, 60 pounds of armor and all, into Lake Ageri. They sink immediately, their armor pulling them down into black water. Horses with broken legs thrash and scream. More logs follow. Boulders the size of wine barrels carom down the slope. The Austrian formation, already compressed in the narrow road, is hammered by an avalanche of wood and stone. Men are crushed where they stand. Horses bolt in panic, throwing riders, trampling infantry. The column fractures into isolated pockets of confused, terrified soldiers trapped between a lake and a mountain. And then the Swiss charge. 1,500 men come down that slope like an avalanche themselves. Their crampons bite into frozen ground, giving them sure footing where Austrian knights in smooth-soled sabatons slip and sprawl. The Swiss don't charge in a disorganized mob. They move in tight formations, groups of 10 to 20 men supporting each other, advancing with disciplined coordination. And they hit the Austrians with horrifying effectiveness. The halberds rise and fall. These aren't clumsy weapons. In trained hands, an 8-foot polearm is devastatingly versatile. The spear point thrusts into gaps in armor. Under the arm, behind the knee, through the visor. The axe blade hooks behind a knight's leg and pulls. sending him crashing onto frozen ground where his expensive plate armor becomes a metal coffin. The hook catches a shoulder plate and rips it away, exposing the quilted padding beneath for a sword thrust, and Swiss military flails, spiked iron balls on wooden handles, crush helmets like eggshells. The Austrian knights cannot fight back effectively. They cannot lower their lances horizontally in this confined space. They cannot charge. There's nowhere to go. Forward is blocked by logs and bodies, behind is their own column pressed tight. To the left is the lake, to the right is a steep slope swarming with enemies. Knights try to dismount and fight on foot, but they're trained for mounted combat. On the ground, in armor designed for horseback, they're slow and clumsy. The Swiss are faster, more mobile, more coordinated, and they're methodical. There's no chivalric nonsense about honorable combat here. This is butchery. A knight stumbles on ice, and 3 halberds converge on him. He raises his arms to protect his head, and the blades hook behind his knees, toppling him. Once he's down, a club caves in his helmet. The Swiss are already moving to the next target. Johannes of Winterthur, a 14th century chronicler whose father survived this battle, writes that the mountain folk slew them like sheep in the shambles. No one gave any quarter. That phrase, like sheep in the shambles, is exactly right. This isn't a battle. This is slaughter on an industrial scale. The Austrians cannot retreat because their own rear ranks are pushing forward, not yet understanding what's happening at the front. They cannot advance because the road is blocked by destroyed barricades, fallen logs, and piles of bodies. They cannot escape to the sides, so they die. In the road, pressed so tightly together they can barely raise their weapons. In the lake, drowning in armor they cannot remove. On the icy ground, hacked apart by farmers with pole weapons. Duke Leopold himself fights in the chaos, trying desperately to rally his men to organize some kind of defense or retreat. He nearly dies. Contemporary accounts describe him cutting through his own fleeing soldiers to escape, riding away half dead from extreme sorrow. Count Wilhelm II von Montfort-Tétang, commander of the Austrian vanguard, dies in the initial ambush, likely among the first to fall when the trap sprang. With him dies the Austrian command structure. Junior nobles try to take charge, but there's no way to communicate orders in this madness. The battle, if you can even call it that, lasts perhaps 3 hours. The killing continues longer. Austrian soldiers who try to swim across Lake Egeri drown under the weight of their equipment. Those who throw down their weapons and beg for mercy are cut down anyway. The Swiss offer no quarter. They cannot afford to. They're outnumbered 5-1 overall. If this battle goes wrong, if the Austrians regroup, the forest cantons will be annihilated. So the Swiss kill everyone they can reach. When it's over, the road through Morgarten Pass is unrecognizable. The ground is carpeted with bodies, men and horses tangled together in a frozen mass. Lake Egeri's shoreline is piled with drowned soldiers and expensive armor. The water itself turns red. Local legend recorded in chronicles claims the lake runs blood red at midnight on every anniversary of the battle because so many died in its waters. That's folklore. But it's folklore based on genuine horror. Modern historians debate the exact numbers. Medieval sources always exaggerate, but the scale of disaster is undeniable. Contemporary accounts claim Duke Leopold lost 4,500 men, including the vast majority of his knights. Swiss casualties are described as light, not negligible, not zero, but light. Probably dozens dead, perhaps 100 wounded. The casualty ratio is staggering. 9 Austrian soldiers dead for every Swiss casualty, maybe more. News of the catastrophe spreads with terrifying speed. A Habsburg naval force on Lake Lucerne preparing to attack Unterwalden from the water, hears the reports and retreats without engaging. Count Strasbourg, leading a diversionary force through Brunig Pass, withdraws hastily when he learns Leopold's army no longer exists. The entire Austrian offensive collapses. Leopold rides back to Baden in shock and humiliation. His surviving knights scatter to their estates. The levied infantry from Zurich and Lucerne slip away, wanting nothing more than to forget what they saw. And in the forest cantons, 1,500 militiamen walk home from the bloodiest ambush in medieval history, carrying captured weapons and armor as trophies. But here's the thing about Morgarten. The battle itself is devastating, but the real impact is psychological and political. For centuries, European warfare has been defined by mounted nobility. Knights are the military elite. They're expensive to train and equip. A full set of plate armor costs as much as a peasant farmer will earn in a lifetime. War horse costs even more. Knights are professionals, trained from childhood in mounted combat, steeped in the culture of chivalry and martial honor, and they're supposed to be invincible. Common soldiers, levied infantry, militia, farmers with spears, are supposed to break and run when knights charge. That's the social order. That's how warfare works. Nobility rules because nobility can fight, and common people cannot. Morgarten destroys that myth. It proves with brutal clarity that disciplined infantry fighting on favorable terrain with appropriate weapons can annihilate cavalry. The lesson resonates across Europe, At Courtrai in 1302, Flemish militia used pikes to slaughter French knights in a similar ambush. At Bannockburn in 1314, 1 year before Morgarten, Scottish infantry defeated English cavalry in marshy ground, but Morgarten is even more extreme. The Swiss don't just win, they obliterate an army 5 times their size with minimal casualties. And they do it with farmers using farming tools adapted for war. The halberd is just an evolution of agricultural cutting tools. The tactics are just mountain hunting techniques applied to human prey. This is terrifying to Europe's aristocracy because it suggests their military supremacy is an illusion, maintained only as long as they choose the battlefield and the conditions. Less than a month after the battle, representatives from Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden meet at Brunnen on the shore of Lake Lucerne. On December 9, 1315, they signed the Pact of Brunnen. This document reaffirms and strengthens the original 1291 Federal Charter. It establishes mutual defence obligations in more explicit detail. It creates mechanisms for resolving disputes between the cantons. And, critically, it uses for the first time the word Eidgenossenschaft, confederacy. This is the birth certificate of Switzerland. The 3 forest cantons, bound together by their victory at Morgarten, formally declare themselves a union of equals, not a kingdom, not a feudal hierarchy, a confederation where each canton maintains its autonomy but pledges to support the others. This is a revolutionary political structure in 1315. Monarchy and feudalism dominate Europe. Democracy exists only in limited forms in Italian city-states and a few other scattered locations. But here in the mountains, a different model is emerging. Government by consent, mutual defence, collective decision-making. And other communities notice. In 1332, the city of Lucerne, looking at Austrian weakness and Swiss strength, joins the Confederation. Zurich follows in 1351. Glarus and Zug join in 1352. Bern, one of the most powerful cities in the region, joins in 1353. By the mid-14th century, 8 cantons form the Confederation, and the Swiss begin to develop their reputation as the most formidable infantry in Europe. They refine their tactics. The halberd becomes standardized, 8 feet long, the head combining a spear point, an axe blade, and a curved hook. Swiss formations become famous for their density and discipline. They train constantly. Every able-bodied man from age 16 serves in the militia. They drill in formation. They practice coordinated maneuvers. And they develop an offensive doctrine that's utterly ruthless. Advance steadily, close to contact quickly, show no mercy. The victories continue. At Laupen in 1339, a Swiss-Bernese force defeats a much larger feudal army using halberd formations. At Sempach in 1386, Swiss infantry annihilate Austrian knights again, this time on open ground. Leopold's grandson, Duke Leopold III, dies in that battle, pierced by a halberd while fighting on foot. The Habsburgs lose another generation to Swiss pole weapons. At Naffels in 1388, 600 Swiss militiamen defeat 6,000 Austrian soldiers using another mountain ambush, this time with even more extreme casualty ratios. By 1400, Swiss military prowess is legendary. By 1450, Swiss mercenaries are the most sought-after soldiers in Europe. Kings pay fortunes to hire Swiss pike formations. The French, the Germans, the Italians, the Pope himself. Everyone wants Swiss troops. And the reason is Morgarten. That cold November morning in 1315, when farmers killed knights, establishes a military tradition that will dominate European warfare for 2 centuries. Here's what makes this remarkable from a purely tactical perspective. The Swiss don't win through superior technology. Their equipment is simpler and cheaper than Austrian gear. They don't win through individual martial prowess. Austrian knights are professional warriors. The Swiss win through 3 things: terrain, discipline, and ruthlessness. They choose ground where cavalry cannot operate effectively. They coordinate their militia with precision that professional armies struggle to match. And they fight with absolute savagery, offering no mercy, taking no prisoners, killing wounded enemies without hesitation. This combination is devastating. And it's teachable. The Swiss prove that you don't need noble birth or expensive equipment to be an effective soldier. You need training, coordination, appropriate weapons, and the willingness to be utterly merciless. This has profound implications. If common people properly organized can defeat professional nobility, then the entire social structure of feudalism is vulnerable. The nobility justifies its privileges, its wealth, its land, its political power, by claiming military superiority. Knights protect society from external threats. That's the social contract. Commoners work, nobility fights, but Morgarten proves that's not true. Commoners can fight, and they can win. This realization spreads slowly, but it spreads. Peasant revolts become more common and more successful in the 14th and 15th centuries. Urban militias become more assertive. The military monopoly of the aristocracy erodes. The Swiss Confederation, born at Morgarten, becomes a living example that free people can defend themselves against empires. But we should be careful not to romanticize this too much. The Swiss at Morgarten are not fighting for abstract ideals of liberty. They're fighting for very concrete things: the right to control their own land, to avoid Habsburg taxation, to maintain their traditional autonomy. Werner Stauffacher isn't a revolutionary idealist. He's a magistrate protecting his community's interests through the most effective means available: violence. Swiss militiamen aren't heroes rising nobly against oppression. They're farmers who've been training for years for exactly this scenario, who build an elaborate trap, who slaughter men who cannot defend themselves, who offer no mercy because they cannot afford mercy. This is pragmatic, brutal, effective warfare. We can admire the tactical brilliance. We can appreciate the underdog victory. But we shouldn't pretend this is clean or noble. War never is. And the Swiss themselves understand this. Their military tradition, built on Morgarten and refined over generations, is fundamentally about controlled aggression. Swiss pike formations in later centuries are famous not just for their defensive strength, but for their relentless offensive pressure. They advance steadily under fire, absorbing casualties, closing to contact, and then grinding through enemy formations with mechanical efficiency. It's brutal. It's not chivalrous. But it works. And because it works, Swiss soldiers become indispensable. For 200 years, Swiss mercenaries serve in every major European conflict. They fight for France, for the Holy Roman Empire, for Italian city-states, for the Pope. They're expensive. Swiss troops demand high wages, but they're worth it because they don't break. Swiss formations hold when others would run, and that reputation is born here, in a frozen mountain pass where farmers with halberds prove that disciplined infantry can annihilate cavalry. The long-term legacy of Morgarten is complex. Militarily, it's a turning point in the decline of mounted knights and the rise of infantry dominance. Politically, it's the foundation of Swiss independence. The Confederation expands over centuries, eventually growing to 26 cantons. Switzerland survives the Reformation, the 30 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars. In 1648, the Peace of Westphalia formally recognizes Swiss independence from the Holy Roman Empire. In 1815, the Congress of Vienna declares Switzerland permanently neutral. That neutrality holds through both world wars. Modern Switzerland, prosperous, democratic, neutral, traces its origins directly to the Pact of Brunn, signed 4 weeks after Morgarten. But there's also a darker legacy. The same military tradition that defends Swiss independence also provides mercenaries to whoever can pay. Swiss soldiers fight on both sides of the Italian wars. They serve French kings as the Garde Écossaise and later the Swiss Guard. In 1527, Swiss mercenaries defending Pope Clement VII fight to the death as Habsburg troops sack Rome. 189 guards die protecting the Pope's escape. It's heroic and tragic, but it's also mercenary service. Men killing and dying not for their homes but for money. The Swiss eventually turn away from mercenary service in the 19th century, but for 300 years, Swiss military prowess, born at Morgarten, is for sale to the highest bidder. There's also the question of historical memory versus historical reality. Morgarten becomes a foundational myth for Swiss national identity. The story is simplified, heroicized, turned into patriotic legend. In the 16th century, the chronicler Egidius Tschudi embellishes the tale with invented details. In the 19th century, as modern Switzerland consolidates its identity, Morgarten is celebrated as the birth of the nation. Monuments are erected, patriotic paintings depict heroic mountaineers defending freedom against tyrannical invaders. And there's truth in that narrative. But there's also simplification. The real Werner Stauffacher, to the extent we can reconstruct him from fragmentary records, is a local magistrate involved in raiding a monastery and organizing an ambush. He's capable and ruthless, not a symbol of universal liberty. The real Swiss militiamen are farmers protecting their economic interests, not freedom fighters battling tyranny. The real battle is a lopsided massacre, not a heroic last stand. But here's the thing: myths matter. The story a nation tells itself about its origins shapes its identity and values. Switzerland tells itself that it was born when ordinary people, united by mutual defense pacts, defeated an empire that sought to dominate them. That story emphasizes values that become central to Swiss identity: decentralized government, direct democracy, armed neutrality, civic militia rather than standing army. Modern Switzerland still has universal male conscription. Every Swiss man serves in the military and keeps his rifle at home. That's a direct continuation of the militia tradition born at Morgarten. Switzerland's commitment to neutrality, its resistance to joining larger political unions, its insistence on cantonal autonomy within a federal system, all of these trace back to the political structure created in the wake of that November battle in 1315. So what do we take from this? What does Morgarten teach us 700 years later? First, that the outcome of conflicts is not predetermined by the size of armies or the expense of equipment. Tactical intelligence, terrain selection, and disciplined execution can overcome vast material advantages. The Swiss prove that decisively. Second, that the social order is not as fixed as those in power claim. For centuries, European nobility justifies its privileges by claiming military superiority. Morgarten, along with Courtrai, Bannockburn, and later battles like Crécy and Agincourt, proves that common people, properly organized, are just as capable of violence as aristocrats. That revelation has political consequences that ripple across centuries. Third, that small communities, united by genuine mutual interest, can resist much larger powers. The Swiss Confederation starts as 3 small mountain cantons. It survives and expands because those cantons genuinely support each other, creating a whole stronger than its parts. But Morgarten also teaches darker lessons. That ambush and surprise are often more effective than courage. That ruthlessness wins battles. The Swiss offer no quarter because they cannot afford to speed. That victory in war often comes from exploiting your enemy's mistakes and overconfidence. Duke Leopold marches into Morgarten Pass because he assumes peasants cannot threaten knights. That assumption costs him 4,000 soldiers. And finally, that military success creates its own problems. The Swiss develop such a fearsome military reputation that for centuries they export violence as mercenaries, fighting in other people's wars for money. Same military prowess that defends Swiss independence also turns Swiss soldiers into commodities. When you visit Morgarten today, and you can, the site is marked with monuments and interpretive signs. It's hard to imagine the slaughter that occurred there. The road along Lake Ageri is paved now, wide enough for cars. The mountainside is covered in peaceful forest. It's beautiful and calm. But on November 15, 1315, this place was hell. Thousands of men died here in a few hours of mechanical butchery. The lake ran red with blood. The screams echoed off the mountains. And when it was over, the political map of Europe had changed. A new nation was born, not through diplomacy or royal decree, but through violence so overwhelming that the Habsburgs never seriously threatened the forest cantons again. The battle proves something both inspiring and terrible about human nature, that ordinary people, when their survival is threatened, are capable of extraordinary coordination and devastating violence, that the social hierarchies that seem permanent and natural, nobility over commoners, cavalry over infantry, are actually fragile, maintained by belief as much as reality. In that terrain, surprise and ruthless execution matter more in battle than honor, breeding, or individual courage. Duke Leopold's knights were brave. Their courage did not save them. They died in ice water and frozen mud, killed by farmers with pole weapons, because bravery without tactical awareness is just expensive suicide. Switzerland remembers Morgarten because it's the moment when the Confederation becomes real, when 3 small cantons prove they can defend their autonomy against imperial power. The world should remember Morgarten because it's one of the clearest demonstrations in history that the outcome of conflicts depends not on who has the most expensive equipment or the most prestigious warriors, but on who understands the battlefield better, and who is willing to be more ruthless in exploiting that understanding. Werner Stauffacher and the Swiss militiamen understood that the road through Morgarten Pass was not just terrain, it was a weapon, and they used it with surgical precision to inflict a defeat so total that it changed the course of European history. So the next time someone tells you that superior technology or professional training guarantees victory, remember 1,500 Swiss farmers who annihilated 9,000 Austrian soldiers in 3 hours. Remember that disciplined terrain and tactical intelligence can overcome almost any material advantage. And remember that nations are not born from noble declarations or royal lineage. They are born from moments like Morgarten, where people united by mutual survival decide they will not submit, and they prove it with blood and iron on ground of their choosing. That's the lesson written in corpses in a mountain pass 700 years ago, and it remains relevant every time a small determined force faces a larger, overconfident power. The outcome is not predetermined. Geography matters, psychology matters, and ruthlessness more than anything else decides who walks away and who drowns in icy water wearing 60 pounds of useless armor. If this forgotten battle that changed European history resonated with you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future deep dives into the military disasters that textbooks overlook. And tell me in the comments, what other lopsided battles should we explore? Where did you first hear about Morgarten, or is this your first time learning about Switzerland's blood-soaked birth? I read every comment, and your suggestions shape what we cover next. Thanks for joining me in this frozen mountain pass, where peasants prove that knights bleed just like everyone else.